Machiavelli at work. Are you being managed or manipulated? A 5-minute audit for office politics. The fluorescent lights hummed, a constant low-grade irritant in the otherwise hushed expanse of the open-plan office. Sarah stared at her monitor, the cursor blinking with an almost mocking rhythm, a tiny digital heartbeat in the vast emptiness of her motivation. Another project deadline loomed, another series of meetings felt like carefully choreographed dances of veiled intentions, and another week bled into the next, marked not by accomplishment, but by a gnawing sense of being managed. But managed by whom, and for what purpose? Was this simply the nature of corporate life, a necessary evil to navigate the currents of productivity and profit, or was something more insidious at play? The air itself seemed thick with unspoken agendas, with subtle nudges and carefully crafted narratives designed to steer individual efforts towards unseen goals. It felt less like collaboration and more like a complex game, one where the rules were rarely explicit and the players often wore masks of professional courtesy while maneuvering for advantage. This pervasive feeling, this subtle unease, wasn't just Sarah's alone. It echoed in hushed conversations by the coffee machine, in weary sighs exchanged during lunch breaks, in the collective unspoken question hanging over the cubicles. Are we truly in control of our professional destinies, or are we merely pawns in a larger game, expertly guided by unseen hands? This feeling of being managed can be unsettling, a constant low hum of anxiety beneath the surface of our daily work lives. We strive for autonomy, for purpose, for the satisfaction of genuine contribution, yet often find ourselves responding to external pressures, to directives that seem to originate from a distant, almost abstract authority. The question then arises, where does effective management end and subtle manipulation begin? This isn't about the blunt force of overt coercion, the kind that makes the power imbalance glaringly obvious. No, this is about the more nuanced, often more potent forms of influence that operate in the shadows of everyday interactions. It's about the art of framing, the careful selection of information, the strategic deployment of praise or criticism, all designed to shape our perceptions and guide our actions in specific directions. Think about those times when a particular proposal suddenly gains traction after a seemingly innocuous comment from a senior colleague, or when a project you initially felt ambivalent about becomes your sole focus after a series of persuasive conversations. These aren't necessarily malicious acts, but they are acts of influence, and understanding their mechanics is crucial to navigating the modern professional landscape. The modern office, with its complex hierarchies and interconnected workflows, is a fertile ground for these subtle power dynamics. We are constantly exposed to a barrage of communication, from emails and memos to informal chats and formal presentations. Within this torrent of information, how do we discern genuine guidance from strategically curated narratives? How do we protect our own agency when so many forces are subtly pushing us in predetermined directions? The stakes are higher than just career advancement. They touch upon our sense of self-worth, our ability to make authentic choices, and our very perception of reality within the workplace. This exploration is not about casting blame or fostering paranoia, but about cultivating a discerning eye, about developing the intellectual tools to understand the forces at play and to reclaim our space within them. We are, in essence, living in a world where the principles of power and influence, once confined to the halls of princes and generals, have seeped into the fabric of our daily lives, particularly within the professional sphere. The very notion of management itself can be a double-edged sword. On one hand, it promises order, efficiency, and the achievement of collective goals. On the other, when wielded without transparency or genuine consideration for individual autonomy, it can morph into a sophisticated form of control, where our thoughts, motivations, and actions are subtly shaped to serve the interests of others. This isn't a new phenomenon, of course. The ancient thinkers grappled with these very questions, albeit in different contexts. They observed the intricate dance of power, the ways in which leaders could sway the masses, and the ethical considerations that arose from such influence. But today, these dynamics are amplified by the speed and pervasiveness of modern communication, by the intricate webs of corporate structures, and by the psychological pressures that drive us to conform and succeed. The challenge, then, is to understand these mechanisms not as abstract theories, but as lived realities that shape our daily experiences. Consider the subtle art of framing a problem. A manager might present a difficult task not as an insurmountable obstacle, but as a growth opportunity. This simple linguistic shift, while seemingly benign, can profoundly alter our perception of the challenge, transforming potential dread into eager anticipation. Or think about the power of selective information. Certain data points might be highlighted, while others are quietly omitted, leading us to conclusions that might not be entirely accurate, but are certainly convenient for the presenter. These are not necessarily Machiavellian plots, but they are instances where influence is being exerted, where the narrative is being shaped. The question for us, as individuals navigating these environments, becomes, how do we develop the critical faculties to recognize these techniques, to understand the underlying intentions, and to respond in a way that preserves our own integrity and autonomy? It's about moving beyond a passive acceptance of managerial directives and cultivating an active, discerning engagement with the forces that shape our professional lives. This journey into the heart of office politics, into the subtle interplay of power and perception, is not a descent into cynicism. Rather, it is an ascent into clarity. It is about understanding the terrain so that we can navigate it with purpose and conviction, rather than being swept along by currents we don't comprehend. We will explore how ancient wisdom can illuminate modern challenges, how understanding human psychology can equip us to discern truth from artifice, and how, ultimately, we can foster environments where genuine progress and individual well-being are not in opposition, but are intertwined. The aim is not to become manipulative ourselves, but to become astute observers, capable of recognizing manipulation when it occurs, and of choosing our own paths with greater awareness and deliberate intent. This is a call to intellectual vigilance, a gentle urging to look beyond the surface and to understand the deeper currents that shape our working lives. It's about empowering ourselves with knowledge, not to control others, but to control our own responses, to make our own choices, and to find a more authentic and fulfilling path within the complex ecosystem of the modern workplace. The hum of the office lights may continue, but our understanding of its rhythm will be profoundly transformed. The very language we use in professional settings is a potent tool of influence, often employed with more strategic intent than we might consciously realize. Think about the deliberate choice of words to frame a situation. When a company undergoes a right-sizing rather than layoffs, or when employees are asked to synergize instead of collaborate, these aren't mere euphemisms. They are carefully selected terms designed to soften the impact, to reframe potentially negative events into more palatable, even positive concepts. This linguistic alchemy operates on a subconscious level, subtly altering our emotional response and our perception of the underlying reality. The power lies in the association. Right-sizing evokes efficiency and optimization, while layoffs conjures images of hardship and loss. Similarly, synergy suggests a dynamic, innovative outcome, whereas collaboration can sometimes feel more pedestrian, more about the grunt work than the grand vision. This is not about deception in the crude sense, but about the sophisticated sculpting of perception through the careful deployment of rhetoric. The goal is often to foster a sense of shared purpose and positive momentum, even when the underlying circumstances are challenging. Furthermore, the architecture of communication channels themselves can be a form of management. Consider the difference between an email announcement and a face-to-face meeting. An email allows for a more controlled dissemination of information, where every word can be chosen and polished. It also offers a degree of distance, preventing immediate questions or challenges. A face-to-face meeting, on the other hand, opens the door for spontaneous dialogue, for the unfiltered expression of concerns, and for the possibility of collective problem-solving. When a decision is presented through a one-way communication channel, especially one that doesn't easily allow for follow-up questions or debate, it subtly reinforces a hierarchical structure. It positions the sender as the sole arbiter of information and direction, and the recipient as the passive recipient. This isn't inherently nefarious, but it is a powerful mechanism for guiding thought and action without inviting dissent or alternative perspectives. It's a way of managing the flow of ideas, ensuring that the narrative remains aligned with the intended message. The absence of immediate feedback can create an illusion of universal agreement, making individuals less likely to voice dissenting opinions for fear of appearing out of step. Another crucial layer involves the strategic use of social proof and peer influence. When a new initiative is introduced and employees are made aware of how many of their colleagues have already embraced it or expressed enthusiasm, this can create a powerful incentive to conform. This taps into our innate desire to belong and to be part of a successful group. The message subtly shifts from "you should do this" to "everyone else is doing this and it's working." And this can be particularly effective when the influencers are perceived as credible or successful themselves. It's a form of social engineering, leveraging our natural tendency to follow the herd when we perceive the herd as moving in a desirable direction. Think about the carefully curated testimonials or case studies that are presented during company-wide meetings. They are designed not just to inform, but to persuade, by demonstrating that others have already navigated the path successfully and are reaping the rewards. This can be a legitimate way to encourage adoption of beneficial practices, but it also carries the potential for manipulation if the testimonials are cherry-picked or if the success being demonstrated is not universally applicable or even entirely genuine. The implication is that if you are not participating, you are somehow missing out, or worse, you are not a team player. Conversely, consider the impact of carefully timed or strategically placed feedback. A manager might offer effusive praise for a minor accomplishment, thereby subtly encouraging the repetition of that specific behavior. Or they might offer constructive criticism on a less critical aspect of a project, diverting attention from more significant issues or alternative approaches. This is not about outright lying, but about the art of selective emphasis. By highlighting certain aspects and downplaying others, the narrative is shaped, the individual's focus is narrowed, their attention drawn to what the manager deems important, or at least what the manager wants them to think is important. This can be incredibly effective in guiding an individual's efforts without the need for explicit directives. It's like nudging a ship's rudder by almost imperceptible degrees. Over time, the course can be significantly altered. The individual often feels they are acting on their own initiative, driven by their own desire to please or to achieve, unaware that their motivations have been subtly influenced by the carefully calibrated feedback they have received. This psychological dance requires a keen awareness of our own responses and a willingness to question the origins of our impulses. Beyond the explicit communication and social dynamics, the very structure of organizational incentives can operate as a powerful, often invisible, hand-guiding behavior. Consider how performance metrics are designed and rewarded. When an employee is primarily evaluated and compensated based on individual output, it naturally steers their focus towards maximizing that specific metric, even if it means neglecting other crucial but unquantified aspects of their role. This creates a narrow lens through which professional success is viewed. The incentive system, intended to drive productivity, can inadvertently foster a culture of tunnel vision, where broader organizational goals or ethical considerations take a backseat to the pursuit of quantifiable targets. For example, a salesperson incentivized solely on closing deals might overlook the long-term value of client relationships or the potential for upselling more complex solutions if they aren't directly tied to immediate commission. Conversely, a team member rewarded for collaborative contributions might hesitate to push back on a flawed idea if doing so could be perceived as uncooperative, thereby jeopardizing their social capital within the team. These incentive structures, while seemingly objective, are in fact carefully constructed narratives about what constitutes valuable work, and they profoundly shape individual decision-making. Furthermore, the concept of organizational culture itself can be a sophisticated tool for management, often operating through implicit norms and expectations rather than explicit rules. Think about the unspoken understanding of what constitutes acceptable working hours, the appropriate level of enthusiasm for company initiatives, or the expected response to challenging feedback. These cultural undercurrents are absorbed by employees through observation and interaction, shaping their behavior in ways they may not even consciously recognize. When a company culture implicitly values long hours, for instance, individuals might feel compelled to stay late, not because they have an overwhelming workload, but because appearing to do so signals dedication and commitment. This creates a performative aspect to work, where the appearance of effort can be as valued, if not more so, than the actual substance of the work. Similarly, a culture that discourages questioning authority can stifle innovation and critical thinking, as employees learn that silence and compliance are the safest routes to career progression. These cultural norms, deeply embedded within the organizational fabric, exert a continuous, subtle pressure, guiding individuals towards behaviors that align with the prevailing ethos, irrespective of their personal convictions or the objective merits of those behaviors. The deliberate cultivation of urgency is another potent management technique that warrants examination. When tasks are consistently framed as time-sensitive, even when they are not inherently so, it can create a state of perpetual high alert. This heightened sense of urgency can override more considered decision-making processes, encouraging individuals to act quickly and decisively, often without fully exploring alternatives or potential consequences. It's a psychological lever that can be pulled to accelerate action and bypass potential hesitation. Imagine a scenario where a relatively minor issue is suddenly declared a critical priority, demanding immediate attention and the reallocation of resources. This manufactured urgency can serve to reinforce the perceived importance of the task or the authority of the person declaring it, while simultaneously distracting from other, potentially more significant, ongoing work. The constant pressure to respond rapidly can also lead to burnout and a diminished capacity for strategic thinking, as individuals are perpetually reacting rather than proactively planning. It's a tactic that, when employed consistently, can keep employees in a reactive mode, making them more susceptible to direction and less likely to engage in deep, reflective work that might challenge the status quo. The subtle manipulation of expectations is another powerful, yet often overlooked aspect of professional management. This isn't about setting achievable goals, but about cultivating a specific psychological landscape that shapes how individuals perceive their progress and their environment. Consider the phenomenon of habituation, the tendency for our baseline for what constitutes normal or acceptable to shift over time based on repeated exposure. In a professional context, this can manifest in the gradual erosion of previously held standards. For instance, if a team consistently works through lunch for an extended period, the expectation shifts from having a dedicated break to a working lunch becoming the norm. The initial discomfort or deviation from prior habits fades, replaced by a new, internalized expectation. This isn't necessarily a conscious directive from management, but a consequence of consistent practice and the absence of counter-narratives. The result is that individuals may find themselves adhering to new, often more demanding standards without ever having explicitly agreed to them, simply because their frame of reference has been subtly recalibrated. They may even rationalize this shift, believing they are simply becoming more efficient or dedicated, unaware that their very definition of a reasonable workday has been altered. Building on this, however, the management of information flow extends beyond mere content selection. It also encompasses the timing and sequencing of disclosures. Imagine a scenario where a company is planning a significant restructuring. Instead of a single comprehensive announcement, information might be drip-fed over weeks or months, often through indirect channels or informal conversations. This gradual release of information can serve multiple purposes. It allows management to gauge reactions and adjust their strategy based on early feedback, much like a sculptor chipping away at stone. It can also create a sense of anticipation and, paradoxically, a feeling of being in the know for those who receive early snippets, fostering a sense of loyalty or insider status. Conversely, it can also breed anxiety and speculation among those who are left in the dark, a form of psychological pressure that can make them more receptive to any concrete information or direction that eventually emerges, simply to alleviate the uncertainty. This staged disclosure is a sophisticated form of narrative control, shaping employee perception not just by what they are told, but by when and how they are told it. Furthermore, the strategic deployment of ambiguity can be a powerful tool. When objectives are deliberately left vague, or when performance criteria are ill-defined, it can create a space where management has considerable latitude to interpret outcomes. This ambiguity can be framed as fostering creativity or encouraging independent problem-solving, but it also allows for selective judgment. An employee's success or failure can then be retrospectively defined by management to fit a pre-existing narrative or agenda. If an initiative doesn't yield the desired results, the ambiguity of the original goals allows management to point to a perceived lack of effort or a deviation from an implied but unstated path. Conversely, if the outcome is favorable, management can claim that the employee perfectly understood and executed their implicit vision. This creates a situation where employees are constantly trying to decipher unspoken expectations, expending significant mental energy on interpretation rather than execution. It's a subtle form of power, where the absence of clear boundaries allows for constant redefinition and control. Another crucial layer involves the cultivation of a specific emotional climate. Consider how a manager might consistently express optimism and enthusiasm, even in the face of significant challenges. While this can be motivating, it can also serve to suppress legitimate concerns or anxieties. Employees might feel that expressing doubt or pessimism would be seen as a lack of faith or a failure to embody the desired positive outlook. This can lead to a situation where genuine problems are swept under the rug, not out of malice, but out of a collective, unspoken agreement to maintain a facade of unwavering positivity. This emotional management creates a pressure to conform, not just in action, but in feeling, It can prevent the necessary critical dialogue that arises from acknowledging and addressing difficulties head-on. The workplace becomes a stage where certain emotions are encouraged and others are suppressed, all in service of a particular organizational narrative. The subtle management of perception through carefully curated information extends beyond overt framing. It delves into the realm of selective omission and the strategic deployment of information asymmetry. Consider how certain organizational initiatives are presented without full context, or how performance data is shared in a way that highlights successes while downplaying challenges. This isn't necessarily about outright falsehoods, but about constructing a narrative through what is left unsaid. For example, a new software rollout might be championed with enthusiastic testimonials about its efficiency gains, while the significant training time required, the potential for initial productivity dips, and the underlying technical complexities are quietly de-emphasized. This selective revelation creates a skewed perception of the initiative's true impact, making it appear more universally beneficial and less burdensome than it might actually be. Consequently, employees might enter into the adoption of such tools with unrealistic expectations, leading to frustration and a sense of being misled when the full scope of the effort becomes apparent. The power here lies not in fabrication, but in the art of strategic silence, where the absence of certain details is as potent as the presence of others. Furthermore, the very process by which decisions are communicated can be a mechanism for control. Think about the difference between a collaborative brainstorming session that genuinely invites diverse input and a top-down announcement that merely informs employees of a predetermined outcome. When decisions are presented as fait accompli, even if there was a prior, perfunctory consultation, it subtly reinforces a hierarchical structure and limits opportunities for genuine dissent or alternative perspectives. The illusion of participation can be maintained, while the actual decision-making power remains concentrated. For instance, a meeting might be convened to discuss a new policy, but the underlying tone and the predetermined nature of the discussion signal that the decision has already been made. Employees might feel compelled to offer superficial agreement to avoid appearing obstructive, thereby reinforcing the manager's perception of consensus, even if genuine reservations exist. This creates a climate where critical feedback is discouraged and conformity is subtly rewarded. The absence of a genuine dialogue about alternatives allows management to steer the course with less resistance, ensuring that the chosen path aligns with their pre-existing objectives. Another crucial layer involves the deliberate manipulation of social dynamics to influence individual behavior. Consider how a manager might highlight the achievements of a particular team or individual, not just to praise them, but to implicitly set a benchmark for others. This can create a subtle pressure to emulate that success, even if the circumstances or resources are vastly different. It's a form of social comparison that encourages conformity and aspiration towards a specific, often narrowly defined, ideal. For instance, an organizational newsletter might regularly feature employee spotlight segments, showcasing individuals who exemplify certain values or achieve specific metrics. While seemingly positive, this can inadvertently create a sense of inadequacy for those who don't fit the mold, or pressure individuals to pursue recognition over genuine contribution. The emphasis shifts from intrinsic motivation to extrinsic validation, driven by the desire to be seen and celebrated within the organizational ecosystem. This can lead to individuals prioritizing activities that are visible and likely to garner praise, rather than those that might be more impactful but less overtly recognized. Consequently, the management of uncertainty itself becomes a tool. When future plans are kept deliberately vague, or when organizational changes are announced without clear timelines or specific details, it can create a climate of anxiety. This anxiety, in turn, can make employees more receptive to any form of direction or reassurance, however provisional. It's a psychological tactic that leverages our innate need for stability and predictability. For example, during periods of organizational flux, a manager might offer generalized statements about exciting changes ahead without providing concrete information. This ambiguity can keep employees in a state of heightened awareness and dependence, making them more likely to look to management for guidance and less likely to challenge the unfolding situation. The absence of clear information breeds a fertile ground for speculation and a desire for any form of definitive statement, which management can then leverage to shape the narrative and guide employee actions towards its preferred outcomes. This controlled uncertainty can be more effective than direct command in shaping long-term behavior and organizational alignment. The subtle art of performance management often operates on a foundation of engineered accountability, where the metrics themselves are crafted to elicit specific behaviors. This goes beyond simply measuring output. It involves shaping the very definition of success. Think about how performance reviews are structured. If the primary focus is on individual contributions and collaborative efforts are merely a secondary consideration, it implicitly discourages deep teamwork. Employees learn that their visibility and rewards are tied to solo achievements, leading them to prioritize tasks that can be clearly attributed to their own efforts, even if a more integrated approach would yield superior overall results. This isn't about overt manipulation, but about the systemic reinforcement of a particular work ethic. The manager, by curating the assessment framework, is not just evaluating performance, they are actively directing it, guiding employees towards the behaviors that the system is designed to recognize and reward. This creates a feedback loop where the desired actions are continually reinforced, solidifying a particular mode of operation within the organization. Consider, too, the impact of strategic delegation. When managers delegate tasks, the choice of who receives what can be as influential as the task itself. Assigning a high-profile, challenging project to a favored employee, for instance, not only boosts that individual's visibility, but also implicitly signals to others the criteria for such opportunities, perhaps loyalty, perceived competence, or simply being in the manager's good graces. Conversely, consistently assigning routine or less visible tasks to certain individuals can subtly reinforce their perceived role within the team, limiting their exposure to growth opportunities and shaping their career trajectory without explicit discussion. This isn't about unfairness in the traditional sense, but about the calculated distribution of developmental capital. The manager, through these seemingly straightforward assignments, is actively shaping the team's skill sets and career paths, often in ways that serve the manager's immediate needs for project completion or team cohesion, rather than fostering organic individual growth. Furthermore, the concept of information gating plays a significant role. Managers often act as gatekeepers of crucial information, controlling its flow and deciding who receives it and when. This can manifest in various ways, from withholding details about upcoming organizational changes to limiting access to key stakeholders or resources. When certain individuals or teams are consistently privy to more information or receive it earlier, it creates an inherent advantage. This asymmetry of information can influence decision-making, foster a sense of exclusivity, and subtly elevate the status of those in the know. So, for instance, if only a select group is briefed on the strategic rationale behind a new policy, they are better positioned to align their work and articulate its benefits, potentially overshadowing colleagues who lack that deeper understanding. This controlled dissemination of knowledge empowers the manager by allowing them to shape the narrative and influence the direction of work through strategic withholding, rather than direct instruction. Building on this, however, consider the subtle pressure exerted by opportunity framing. When opportunities for advancement or involvement in special projects are presented, they are often framed in a way that emphasizes the benefits to the organization or the manager's strategic goals, rather than the direct benefits to the individual's career development. For example, an employee might be invited to lead a new initiative, with the emphasis placed on how crucial this is for the department's success, rather than on the skills they will gain or the visibility it will provide them. This framing encourages individuals to view their participation through the lens of organizational need, fostering a sense of duty and obligation. It subtly shifts the motivation from personal growth to service, making individuals more likely to accept roles that align with the manager's agenda, even if those roles don't perfectly align with their own long-term aspirations. This is not about denying the importance of organizational goals, but about recognizing how the way these goals are presented can influence individual choices and perceptions of opportunity. Conversely, the management of risk perception can be a powerful tool. When a manager consistently downplays the potential downsides of a proposed course of action, or highlights only the most optimistic scenarios, it can subtly steer individuals towards riskier endeavors. This isn't about encouraging recklessness, but about shaping the perceived risk-reward calculus. By emphasizing potential gains and minimizing potential losses, the manager can make an otherwise questionable path seem more palatable. For example, when proposing a new, unproven strategy, a manager might focus heavily on the revolutionary potential and the competitive edge it could provide, while glossing over the possibility of failure, the required investment in training, or the potential disruption to existing workflows. This selective emphasis on the upside can lead individuals to commit to initiatives that they might otherwise approach with greater caution, driven by the manager's confident, albeit incomplete, portrayal of the situation. The subtle art of performance calibration offers another angle on how management can steer individual trajectories. This involves not just setting goals, but continually adjusting the perceived difficulty or importance of those goals in alignment with desired outcomes. Imagine a scenario where an employee consistently exceeds expectations on a particular task. Instead of simply acknowledging this success, management might subtly redefine the benchmark for that task, making future achievements appear less extraordinary. This can be achieved through introducing new, more complex criteria or by emphasizing the extraordinary effort required to meet the new, higher standard. The effect is to keep the employee perpetually striving, preventing complacency and ensuring that high performance remains a continuous effort rather than a plateau. It's a way of managing ambition, ensuring that individual drive remains channeled towards organizational needs, preventing a situation where an employee might feel they have arrived and subsequently reduce their intensity. This constant recalibration ensures that the goalposts are always moving, keeping individuals engaged in a perpetual pursuit, often without them fully realizing the strategic nature of this dynamic adjustment. Furthermore, the management of organizational narratives extends to the creation of specific success archetypes. When the company consistently celebrates individuals or teams who embody certain traits, perhaps relentless innovation, unwavering customer focus, or exceptional problem-solving under pressure, it crafts a powerful, albeit implicit, blueprint for what constitutes desirable employee behavior. This isn't about direct instruction, but about social modeling. Employees observe these celebrated archetypes and internalize the behaviors associated with them, often adopting them as their own aspirational models. This can be a powerful force for cultural integration and driving specific organizational values. However, it can also inadvertently marginalize individuals whose strengths lie in different, perhaps less visible areas. For example, an organization that lionizes the disruptor might inadvertently devalue the contributions of meticulous planners or steady, reliable maintainers, even though both are crucial for long-term success. The narrative, in its selective spotlighting, shapes not only what is rewarded, but also what is perceived as valuable. Another crucial layer is the deliberate cultivation of controlled exposure. This refers to how managers strategically decide which projects, clients, or information streams are accessible to different individuals or teams. By controlling who gets to work on high-visibility projects, interact with key stakeholders, or gain access to critical market intelligence, management can effectively steer career paths and influence perceived competence. An employee consistently assigned to internal, less public-facing tasks, for instance, will naturally have fewer opportunities to build a reputation for strategic thinking or client management, regardless of their inherent capabilities. Conversely, those granted access to lucrative client accounts or strategic planning sessions gain invaluable experience and visibility, which can then be leveraged to justify further advancement. This isn't about deliberate sabotage, but about a calculated distribution of developmental opportunities where the manager's choices about exposure directly shape an individual's growth trajectory and their standing within the organizational hierarchy. Conversely, consider the impact of managing the perception of failure. Instead of outright punishing mistakes, a more nuanced approach involves reframing them as learning opportunities, but in a way that subtly reinforces the manager's oversight. A manager might acknowledge that an employee's misstep was understandable given the circumstances, but then immediately pivot to discussing how they, the manager, will implement new checks or provide additional guidance to ensure this doesn't happen again. While this appears supportive, it subtly positions the manager as the ultimate problem solver and guardian against error, reinforcing their indispensable role. It allows for the acknowledgement of imperfection without truly empowering the employee to autonomously navigate future risks. The learning occurs, but within a tightly controlled framework, ensuring that the manager's authority and strategic foresight remain paramount in the employee's perception. This nuanced approach to failure can be more effective in maintaining control than overt reprimands, as it fosters a sense of dependency disguised as mentorship. The subtle art of organizational narrative engineering often relies on the deliberate cultivation of shared myths and foundational stories. These aren't necessarily falsehoods, but rather selective retellings of history that emphasize certain aspects while downplaying others, all to reinforce a particular corporate identity or set of values. Think about how a company might consistently recount the tale of its garage startup origins, highlighting perseverance, innovation, and a David and Goliath spirit. While this narrative might contain kernels of truth, its repeated emphasis serves to imbue the current workforce with a sense of legacy and a shared struggle, fostering a collective identity rooted in overcoming adversity. This shared mythos can be incredibly potent in unifying employees, but it can also serve to obscure the less glamorous realities of past decisions, internal conflicts, or less heroic moments that don't fit the curated story. The myth becomes a lens through which current challenges are interpreted, often encouraging employees to see themselves as continuing a grand, heroic tradition, thereby aligning their actions with the idealized past. Furthermore, consider the impact of managed visibility within the organizational structure. Beyond the explicit delegation of tasks, managers can subtly control the perceived importance and impact of an employee's work by curating the audience for their contributions. When an individual's successes are consistently presented in internal-only memos or team meetings, while the achievements of others are highlighted in broader company-wide communications or even external press releases. It creates a differential in perceived value. This controlled visibility can influence not only how colleagues view an individual's contributions, but also how senior leadership assesses their potential. The manager, by acting as a selective amplifier or dampener of an employee's successes, can subtly shape perceptions of competence and readiness for advancement, all without making explicit judgments about the quality of the work itself. It's a form of influence that operates through the amplification or attenuation of an individual's professional signal. Building on this, however, the concept of incentive alignment through psychological priming offers a more nuanced view. This involves more than just setting bonus structures. It's about subtly conditioning employees to associate desired behaviors with positive emotional states or anticipated rewards, even when those rewards are not explicitly defined. For instance, a manager might consistently use language that frames challenging tasks as opportunities for personal growth or making a significant impact, thereby priming the employee to associate effort and difficulty with positive self-development and altruistic contribution. This psychological priming can make individuals more willing to undertake demanding work, not just for the tangible benefits, but for the internalized sense of achievement and purpose that has been cultivated. The manager, in essence, is not just assigning tasks, but is shaping the very meaning an employee derives from their work, aligning their intrinsic motivations with organizational objectives through carefully chosen language and framing. Conversely, consider the impact of controlled exposure to organizational feedback loops. This refers to how managers manage the flow of information regarding organizational performance and strategic direction. When employees are only privy to curated summaries of market trends or competitive landscapes, or when feedback on their own performance is consistently filtered through a managerial lens, it limits their ability to form independent judgments. This information asymmetry can prevent employees from fully understanding the broader context of their work or identifying potential alternative strategies. For example, if a team is consistently told that their current project is a top priority, but is not privy to shifts in market demand that might render that project obsolete, they will continue to pour resources into it, guided by incomplete information. This controlled feedback loop ensures that employee efforts remain aligned with the manager's immediate objectives, even if those objectives are based on outdated or incomplete data. Another crucial layer is the strategic use of opportunity framing to influence career choices. When opportunities for new roles or projects are presented, managers often emphasize the immediate needs of the organization or the perceived fit of the candidate, rather than clearly delineating the long-term developmental benefits. For instance, an employee might be encouraged to take on a demanding new role, with the primary justification being that we really need someone with your skills in this area right now. While this highlights the employee's value, it can obscure whether this opportunity truly aligns with their personal career aspirations or offers significant growth potential beyond fulfilling an immediate organizational gap. This framing encourages individuals to prioritize immediate organizational needs over their own long-term career trajectory, subtly guiding their development in directions that are most convenient or beneficial for the management structure, rather than necessarily for the individual's holistic professional journey. Reflecting on this journey so far, we've navigated through the intricate currents of professional influence, discerning the subtle currents that shape our daily work lives. The landscape of management, we've observed, is rarely a matter of simple directives. It is a complex interplay of perception, communication, and structural design. The very fabric of our professional experience is woven with threads of subtle guidance, often so finely spun that they become almost invisible. Yet their cumulative effect is profound, shaping not just our actions, but our very understanding of our roles and the environment in which we operate. The way information is presented, the unspoken expectations that govern our interactions, and the very metrics by which our contributions are measured, all converge to create a powerful, often subconscious framework for our professional existence. This framework, while designed to foster efficiency and alignment, can also, if not critically examined, subtly steer us away from our own autonomy and towards predetermined paths. This journey has illuminated the profound impact of narrative, of framing, and of the unspoken expectations that permeate our workplaces, the realization that our professional paths are not solely determined by objective merit, but are also shaped by the subtle architectures of influence, is a critical step towards self-possession. It calls us to look beyond the surface, to question the underlying assumptions, and to recognize the power of our own perceptions. The true audit of office politics, therefore, is not an external assessment of others, but an internal recalibration of our own awareness. It is the ongoing commitment to understanding the forces that shape our professional lives, not to become cynical, but to become more fully ourselves within them. The quiet hum of the lights continues, but now perhaps it sounds less like an irritant and more like an invitation to observe, to reflect, and to navigate with a newfound depth of understanding. The true practice begins now, in the quiet moments of reflection, in the conscious choice to engage with awareness, and in the commitment to charting our own course with intention